This is WAPTEK live from the 53rd circle of Dante's Inferno because they had to add extra circles for all of the lawyers. Science has been hijacked by a group hell-bent on trying to disprove the creator of the universe. This is an assertion made by people who want to have an us versus them attitude about the practicality and the reality of studying nature and trying to understand it. This is a loser's game people want to do, because that way they can always say, I'm being put upon. Everything's triggering. Magnets are triggering. Look up the Insane Clown Posse meme about magnets, please. Science is BS and not being truthful. Science always lies because you believe that it is literally based on doing nothing but trying to disprove your religion. So you're being persecuted by the cell phone you have? Alright, now we're going to get to our first participle dangling here, or principle. This is the title of a video. I'm just going to cover the subject matter. I don't care what's in the video. The person who uploaded it is one of those people telling you can extract gold from salt water, that sort of thing. I'll get to my Microsoft joke later. Here we go. Magnetism bends light, and gravity is only magnetism for some reason. Interesting statement. So gravity is a fictional force. It could also be a virtual force, not fictional. The word fictional and virtual are used interchangeably, but the trouble with this is that that first principle is wrong. Magnetism does not bend light. Because it doesn't. That's just it. It doesn't do it. You can see people running light through a medium that can be affected mechanically or visually by having a magnetic field applied to it, but you're modifying the medium. The light itself isn't bending, and the way you test this is you run light through a vacuum. It doesn't have a medium in it except time-space. Electromagnetic waves consist of an electric and a magnetic field. At least this is how they're modeled, and it's probably that way. They oscillate at right angles to each other at a higher frequency, an upper frequency of the dimensions at a higher frequency. Now what that means is that they have a push and a pull electrically to this packet of energy we call a photon. We're just modeling it at this point. I'm not going to go into the nature of it because I'm not going to go into quantum physics again as much as I can try to avoid it. What that means is that its net electric charge and its net magnetic field nullify each other because they're balanced. It's both a plus and a minus because it's oscillating. So it doesn't have a charge that is one or another charge only that can be affected by a simple magnetic field. Magnetic fields are the equivalent. Magnetic fields are to electromagnetism what DC is to AC. Holding a battery still with nothing doing anything with it won't cause a magnetic field oscillating in a coil of wire. You have to make the electrical field or magnetic field change. It's the change that causes a transfer of energy. And light packets and other electromagnetic phenomena are examples of that change precipitating through time-space over time. And distance, time-space. Anyway, each oscillation is plus and minus and effectively cancels each other out. The net charge or net magnetic field is nulled. It doesn't have one. So it can't be affected at all. Gravity is able to affect light through time-space, and we can see this demonstrated. You have to use certain conditions because you have to find a very massive object like a sun or a sun at an extreme distance and see it warp light beams or positions of stars very slightly. It's called gravitational lensing. And magnetic fields don't have the ability to do that on any scale. Someone, however, brought up a get-out-of-reality card here that I'm going to bring up in a minute, but here we go. Light and all photons effectively are neutral as far as this go. But it's not entirely true that it has no charge. It has an alternating field, either magnetic or electric. The magnetic field rotates the polarization of a photon. It has the effect of tumbling, almost, because it's a sine wave most of the time. This is called the Faraday effect. But the average charge is neutral. Gravity does actually bend light, mostly because it's not bending light, it's warping the field of time-space, or more accurately, it's warping the medium the light is going through. This is the same thing as getting a hunk of plastic tubing, filling it with gel, or just get a piece of plastic pipe and bending it with a heat gun and running light through it. You're basically just making the light bend because the material it's going through has been bent. This is also called ducting and that sort of thing. Now, someone brought up the Delbruck scattering deflection photons Coulomb field nuclei vacuum polarization. But that only happens in a medium as well. At least, now this is an example of someone looking for the most extreme example they can find of something very obscure, so they can say, I'm not going to lose an argument on the internet. It happens in a medium, it won't work in a vacuum, except for the possibility of the following. And this doesn't make any sense, but it could statistically happen. Two photons impact and self-annihilate, which really couldn't happen except under the most bizarre conditions, and would be like one in every couple of billion years you'd see this happen. And they turn into virtual electron and positron pairs because they've annihilated. Photons can annihilate, technically, hypothetically. And at that point, then they would be broken down to their separate components that could be affected by a magnetic field, hypothetically and technically. And then those two would annihilate to each other and become a photon that would go in a different direction. So, yes, technically, someone found an example where light could be bent on a magnetic field in a condition that could technically happen in time-space, in a medium, easily, but in a vacuum of space, only under extremely bizarre circumstances, because they didn't want to admit that a magnet they're holding in their hand isn't really bending light. It's not bending it in a measurable amount. When you see YouTube videos where they're showing this, they're relying on the fact that the optics are focusing light from a light source that is not a perfect pinpoint. The most laughable one is someone using a flashlight that was deliberately set to where it would do a floodlight effect so they could say, hey, it's bending light. And again, it was going through a medium. In this case, it was going through a piece of plastic. Now, why do people do videos trying to prove the opposite of reality and then tell you, hey, donate to my PayPal and help me research this thing I just showed you that doesn't work for doing gold extraction from air? It's called lying to people and getting them to be part of your little cult. One of the rules about being in a cult, and I did a video about this, is that you literally just tell people things that are just not true over and over and over again to weed out the people who are resistant to you lying to them. And then you get them to send you money. It's really not complicated. And they'll always invoke things like, I'm doing this because science is trying to disprove God. No. What happened is that science did not agree with a bunch of presumptions and assumptions and pull it out of your butt explanations for reality that are part of most cultures and most religious groups, because those religious groups and cultures retain answers that have been wrong for centuries, but nobody really had to put them to test. In fact, at one time, people really believed that something could stop a magnetic field, like garlic. They just believed it because some authoritarian person, in this case a scientist or a philosopher in the past, said it happened. What happened is, of course, that's not really true, but people were very resistant to question this. They were not trying to be iconoclasts. They didn't want to destroy their heroes. They didn't want to destroy their icons of power. But the fact is that garlic doesn't stop a magnetic field. There are things that will redirect or duct it, and there are things that seem to block magnetic fields. I mean, that's the effect. But this is like, I mean, I never questioned when I was younger my dad telling me that magnets should bend light, but he only saw one example of it, and it was an extreme example. It was an atom bomb going off. Well, it's in the air. Eventually, he and I sat down. Didn't it produce a shockwave? And he literally facepalmed. He's like, it was the mechanical shockwave in the air warping the light. He wasn't allowed to look at a nuclear bomb because nobody should do that, but he got to look at the edge of the shockwave from it, and also from other explosives. He, in fact, did some experiments later, came back with ringing ears, but he said, yeah, air pressure will warp light. Because it's a shockwave, of course it creates a distortion you can see on videos on YouTube. If a medium is available, light will distort and shift because it's a medium, for the same reason it would do it in water or anything else. The only medium in a vacuum is time-space itself, unless there's one that we don't know about. And hypothetically, or very pathetically, we figured out as a species that it literally is time-space that you're seeing this through. This is the medium that it's going through. And that's why gravity seems to be able to affect light beams. Over a very long distance, you're able to detect this insanely tiny distortion. And an experiment was done right after Einstein came up with one of his hypotheses on this. He says you should be able to see this from the sun, but you'd have to wait for a solar eclipse. So the next solar eclipse that happened, equipment was set up to see if the positions of stars changed very close to this edge. And of course, they had to look for the edge that didn't have a lot of the sun's corona in the way, and they were able to technically see it. So after that point, they started looking at faraway gravitational sources like solar systems or stars or galaxies, and they noticed that galaxies very, very far away, seeing light from even further away, do something called gravitational lensing. So gravity will affect light, but it's an insanely tiny amount. It's not enough to cause the curvature of the Earth to be phonied. Lord Stephen Christ and the rest of you. And I looked for a measurement somewhere where someone was able to measure this, where actually they could. The thing is, over a very, very insanely large distance, like seriously, galaxy diameters, hundreds of light years, you can detect this. And over 93 million miles, you can barely detect it, with our own sun acting as an insanely harsh gravitational source. And it might happen around planets, possibly. You might be able to detect it if they have to be very far away and very dense, so that you can detect it at all, because the deflection is an incredibly tiny amount of picodegrees or whatever. But no, magnetic fields do not bend light, and gravity is not magnetic, and gravity isn't a fictional force. These are presumptions done by people who want you to buy into their sham method for collecting gold from, you know, silly putty or whatever. There's probably more gold in the silly putty than there is in their hands. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. And yeah, that was a meme that should die. Bye.